I am a member of the supernatural branch of the FBI. It's a secret branch. You can ask everyone and their mother about it, and all you'll get is called crazy. But it exists, nonetheless. We're here to protect against the sort of things that our superiors deem unfit for public knowledge. And believe me, they're generally right. If we were to release the details of most of the cases I've been on, the public would be too scared to leave their houses in the morning. I've been an agent for just over a year now, and while the initial excitement of becoming an FBI agent was beginning to wear off, the danger and secrecy of it all managed to keep me on my toes. I'm good at the job. I definitely earn my pay, but I'm no more skilled than most other agents. Then there's my partner. Ace had worked with the branch for 2 years before I got here, so he had a bit more experience than me. But in the long run, we were on fairly even ground. However, Ace was a natural. He never really needed training, breezing through the required courses easily, and his impact on the agency had been noticeable from day one. But, more important than his ingrained skill, he's one of the most morally sound people I know. He always knows the right thing to do. He never had to hesitate in those moments of moral quandary, and his advice has been essential throughout the time I've known him, both in my personal and work life. I've always tried to do the right thing. I didn't want to be an immoral agent, one that bent the rules, but sometimes I've had to. Ace never did. He always found a way to do things the right way, and, more often than not, I simply couldn't see things from his perspective until he revealed it. Anyway, I've been rambling. The point is, Ace and I have been partners for over a year, and we've developed one hell of a working relationship. We're among the top agents in the branch, although, as I said before, a lot of that credit has to go to him. So, when what seemed to be a routine case was on my desk when I arrived at work one morning, I was slightly surprised. "You see this, Carmen?" Ace asked, looking up at me from the desk across from mine, holding up his version of the case file. "I don't think this was meant for us." "It's low-level stuff," I agreed, standing up from my desk. "I'll go talk to Hebert about it. It's possible there's been some kind of mix-up." Damon Hebert was the leader of the investigative aspect of our branch, and his name had been on the case file as our superior that assigned it. I knocked on his office door, and he glanced up. "Agent Clay? What is it?" "It's this," I replied, entering and displaying the case file. "Was there a mistake or something? It just seems like a very trivial matter to send Cochran and I on. Not that I don't want to go against your judgment or anything. I just want to make sure it wasn't accidentally assigned to us." "No, I know it seems like a very simple task, but I have a gut feeling about it," he replied, and I nodded, the realization dawning on me. Hebert's gut was widely known in the branch to be more reliable than some clocks, largely due to his 17 years with the branch. "Trust me. Just head down there, take a look at it, and deal with it if need be. If my gut's wrong, you should be able to take care of it easily. But if my gut's right, we're going to be glad we sent you." "Yes, sir. Sorry to bother you," I said, backing out of the room. "Be careful out there," he called out after me. "Don't take anything for granted." "What's the deal?" Ace asked, noticing that I still had the same case file. "Hebert says he's got a feeling about this one," I told him as I really looked at the file for the first time. "He said it might be nothing, but if his gut's right, only we're going to be able to do anything about it." "If he says so," Ace replied, knowing as well as I did what Hebert's gut meant. He picked up the file as well and began perusing it. "Connecticut, eh? Aren't you from around there?" "Yeah, a bit north," I said. "Maybe you went to high school with whatever monster we're supposed to catch," Ace muses. "You two probably go way back." I rolled my eyes, smiling slightly. The file was a bit more interesting than I'd garnered from just skimming through it. There had been 22 reports in the past month, and they were all of some pale creature wandering through the nearby Naugatuck forest. More detailed ones include descriptions like empty black eye sockets and mouths, and long, cracked fingernails. There were also 2 missing persons in the area, believed to have been tied to these creatures. The first was Charlie Donaghy, a 20-year-old man who had been visiting the town during spring break of that year. He disappeared after forgetting his backpack on a hike with friends and returning to the forest alone to retrieve it. The second was Elizabeth Barry, a 24-year-old woman who'd grown up in nearby Beacon Falls. Barry had disappeared after visiting the forest late at night with her friends, which had initially been attributed to an ex-boyfriend, but his alibi had been cleared. Both were within a month of each other, the same period of time the reports had come in from. I finished a deeper read-through of the file and looked over to Ace. "I'm done. You want to go now, or do you have anything you need to finish up first?" "No time like the present," he replied, closing his file and standing. He walked around the desk, and we started making our way out of the offices and down toward where the Bureau's cars were kept. "So, it looks like there might actually be something to this. That file was a hell of a lot more convincing once I found out Hebert was on board," Ace said as we walked. "We should see if Nolan has a file that matches the descriptions," I suggested, referring to Seth Nolan, our branch's archivist. "You know what? I'll even call him before we leave. Go bring a car around. I'll meet you out front in a few minutes." "Sounds good," Ace said, nodding, and I turned around, returning to the phone on my desk. I had Nolan's number memorized, as it had proved to be one of the more useful ones in the past year, and he picked up after 2 rings. "Hello?" he answered. "Nolan, it's Clay," I told him. "Ace and I are going out on a case. We need a file." "Sure thing. Which one?" he replied. "We're not sure exactly," I explained. "We have reports of white, faceless creatures with black eyes and mouths wandering around a forest. 2 disappearances, but other than that, nothing that aggressive." "All right, I can check," Seth replied, but he didn't sound terribly confident. "I'm gonna be honest, that's not very specific, but I'll see what I can do." "Thanks," I said, my brow furrowing. If he couldn't find something, hell, if he wasn't even optimistic about finding something, it wasn't likely it was there, and that would be rather problematic. After a few moments, my suspicions were all but confirmed. "Hey, yeah, there's nothing that's an exact match," he informed me. "I have the file on a Apodi, but Apodi don't have any facial features, and besides, they're usually much more aggressive." I sighed. The job was going to be significantly more difficult without ample background research. "Sure, I guess. Send it to the Poughkeepsie location. We'll pick it up on the way over." "Sounds good," Seth said, and the line clicked. The main base of operations for the Northeast was in Jervis, New York, on the banks of the Delaware, and that's where Ace and I were. Seth was at our headquarters in Denver, and since we established a base at all major supernatural hotspots, he would fax the file to our Poughkeepsie location so we'd be able to leave right away. I walked back through the halls and out of the base, and I found Ace waiting for me in one of the branch's large black sedans parked on the road in front of the building. "Anything?" he asked, rolling down the window. "No, he said Apodi were the closest match," I replied, entering the car. "That's not right. They're far too aggressive to fit the bill." "Yeah." Ace nodded his agreement as he put the car into gear and began driving out of the main compound. "Well, on the upside, this means the species gets named after us." "That's not what that means at all," I told him, raising my eyebrows. He shrugged. "Yeah, but it's a nice thought. At best, we're getting an amusing anecdote we can't even tell at most parties," I sighed. "I know you're getting your hopes up. This always happens." "There's always a possibility," he reminded me, and we laughed. The drive was long and fairly boring, and after picking up the file in Poughkeepsie, we began to theorize about what could be happening in Naugatuck, as there was still just under an hour and a half left of driving. "No, it has to be something acting with reason," I said. "They've got to be intelligent, because they're not just going around killing everyone that goes into the forest. They've only taken 2 people. "They could have a slow metabolism, provided they're feeding off of their victims," Ace pointed out. "Or, if they aren't, it may be for some sort of ceremony, and they only need 2 victims." I think a ceremony would require some form of rational thoughts. No, they're definitely acting based on reasoning, although it may not be theirs. What do you mean, like a hive mind? Ace asked. They all share one collective consciousness? No, I mean they could be taking orders, I corrected. Whether it's from a queen, like with ants, or something of a different species that managed to get control of them. Interesting theory, Ace said, nodding his approval. But what would their goal be in that scenario? I have a feeling we're going to find out, I replied. We'd left headquarters at around 9:30 that morning, and by the time we arrived at Naugatuck, it was well after noon. A light drizzle had set in, and it provided a morose backdrop for the town as we entered from the north, down Route 8. It was a small town, busy, but small, with a concentration of buildings growing denser the closer we got toward the center. It looked normal. There were people going about their business, shops were open, children were out enjoying their summer vacation, and now, during the lunch hour, the town's restaurants were busy as the midday rush came in. The normalcy of the town meant that people weren't yet worried about the creatures in the forest, which could be a very good thing or a very bad thing. It meant that they didn't see it as enough of a problem to worry about or investigate it. But it also could mean that people would be more reckless in the forest than they should be, which could lead to unnecessary harm. The file had listed 3 sources for us, 2 individuals along with Beacon Falls Congregational Church. Our cover story was that we were with the Federal Subcommittee on National Parks, and we were there to interview various civilians and inspect Naugatuck Forest to judge its worth as a national park. So we were to begin by spreading that idea around, implanting it in the minds of the people of Naugatuck before we even started our actual work. So we did. For a few hours on the first day, we just went around introducing ourselves to local officials and asking random, pointless questions about the forest's size, diversity in wildlife, and level of tourist attraction, which they were more than happy to answer. After we completed establishing a cover story, we made a quick stop at the hotel we'd be staying at, and then prepared to begin our investigation. The rain had only gotten worse since we'd arrived, elevating from a drizzle to a steady shower, and Ace and I had to put on trench coats over our civilian clothes. It was getting late, and by the time we arrived at the forest, the June air had turned cold. I rubbed my arms against the chill and looked out at the parking lot. There was only one car other than ours in the little gravel area, a small gray sedan parked haphazardly by the trailhead. A lack of activity could easily be explained by the rain, but the fact that there was a lone car there could mean trouble. I nodded to the vehicle and said, "Looks like someone's not put out by bad weather." "That's not good," Ace agreed, reflecting my thoughts as we walked up to the information kiosk. I glanced over the huge map for a moment, then looked into the woods themselves. The trees were dense, but with the rain matting down their leaves, the fog had places to set in, and it made for a rather off-putting scene. Every shift in the wind that caused a branch to move, every small rodent skittering off in another direction, seemed like a threat provided that backdrop, so both of our guards were up. "I don't like this," Ace muttered as we slowly began walking down the trail. "I don't like this at all." My hand subconsciously drifted to the butt of my concealed pistol, and I replied, "Nothing to worry about yet. Stay sharp." "Yet," Ace repeated, and we continued on into the forest. The fog grew thicker the further in we went, making things so much worse. There were animals in the forest, and plenty of them, which usually doesn't happen in hotbeds of supernatural activity. It meant that every so often, something would step on a branch, making a sharp noise and setting off every internal alarm we'd developed during our time with the FBI, keeping our nerves fraught and guards up. After around 5 minutes of false alarms, we finally caught our first glimpse of this new species. I spotted it first, out of the corner of my eye, and I almost thought nothing of it, so intently focused that I almost filed it away as normal. But then I glanced back and stopped dead in my tracks. It was hard to make out through the thick fog, but about 100 feet off the trail to my left, there was something standing there, staring directly at me. Ace noticed me stop and without a word looked in the same direction as me, spotting the creature almost instantly. It matched the description from the file perfectly. Thick, white skin that almost looked papier-mâché now that I could actually see it, surrounding 3 voids, 2 eyes, and a mouth. I heard Ace reach for his pistol, but I reached out a hand, gesturing for him to wait, and he stopped. The creature just stood there, perfectly still, its empty eye sockets remaining affixed on us unblinkingly. It had just gone on long enough that I was about to say something when suddenly a second featureless face appeared over the shoulder of the first. It was only there for a few moments before disappearing, the first creature going along with it, fading into the fog like they'd never been there. After a pause, Ace jumped forward to give chase, but I once again stuck out my arm to stop him. "Wait, there's no need, and it's a big risk." He nodded his agreement. "They're not very aggressive," he observed, staring into the fog where the 2 creatures had stood just moments before. "I think you may be right. That's not the stare of a creature running off of instinct." I nodded. "Come on, let's keep going. Let's see if we can find a den or something, a higher concentration we can come back to." "Stay on your toes," Ace reminded me, and we resumed our pace, albeit more cautiously. Strangely enough, the animals never ceased their noises throughout the entire experience. It was as if they weren't bothered by the creatures, like they were a part of the forest ecosystem just like any other animal living there. We didn't talk as we walked. We were focused on once more finding the strange, faceless creatures, and we did, spotting them a few times, but it was always the same as the first time. They'd just stand there at the edge of the fog, staring at us for a few moments before disappearing. We spent about another half hour in the forest, but we'd got what we came for out of the excursion, proof of these creatures' existence. So, after poking around a bit more just to see what we could find, which wasn't much, we returned to the car. The other car was still there when we got back, though we hadn't seen any sign of another human in the entire forest. It wasn't entirely impossible that someone else had been in the forest without encountering us, but it was enough to trip our suspicions as we drove back into town. We quickly ate dinner at a nearby restaurant, then decided to hit one of our sources before turning in for the night. "All right, what's the address?" Ace asked, unfolding the map of Naugatuck we'd picked up at an information booth. 89 Village Circle, I replied, reading from the case file. "It's Mr. Tanner Reese. He claims to have had a non-violent encounter with one of the creatures." "What's he like?" I shrugged. "Doesn't say. He could be a crazy person for all we know." "I should hope not," Ace mused. "If it's true that he met one of them and it didn't kill him, that could mean we have a peaceful way out of this. Does the file say anything about what exactly happened between him and the creature? I mean, depending on his definition of encounter, we could have just had non-violent encounters with several of them." No. It says here he actually spoke with it," I told him, flipping through the pages. "It doesn't say what they talked about, but it was definitely more than just what happened to us." "Do you have the hypochloricin?" he asked, and I reached into my pants pocket, producing a small container with a few red pills inside. "Yep," I replied, examining the tiny ovals for a moment before putting the container back in my pocket. I know we say this a lot, but they really should work on a better memory erasing strategy. This is getting old. Hypochloricin was a pill developed by the scientists at our branch that released a sort of memory-eating bug into the system of whoever consumed it. In technical terms, it's a manufactured virus that targets currently active neurons that produces chemicals that counteract the process the brain utilizes to store memories. The virus lives for 7 to 8 minutes, about 90 seconds of which is used up traveling to the brain, and then it neutralizes whichever memories are retrieved until it dies. It's messy, and more often than not, more memories are erased than intended, but if we can get our witness to consume it, then get them to recount to us most of their supernatural experience, They will forget both us and it, and whatever vague memories of the two that are left over are generally dismissed as false ones. Arriving at Reese's house, we could see that it was a small affair, and it wasn't terribly well kept. The lawn was slightly overgrown, the paint was chipping off the walls, and vines were growing down the walls of a garage that looked like it hadn't been used in decades, his car parked out in front of it. It was dark out when we arrived, but the rain had stopped, so we left our coats in the car, walking up to his porch in just the fake government uniforms we'd been wearing. As we approached the door, I procured a pair of sunglasses from an inside pocket and put them on. "What are you doing?" Ace asked when he noticed them. "You look ridiculous. It's dark out." "I look mysterious," I hissed back as we climbed the steps up to his front door. "He'll be intimidated, trust me." "You're going to make me look silly," he replied, shaking his head. "Oh yeah, because he's going to call Hebert and complain about our unprofessionalism once we leave," I said, rolling my eyes. "Relax. He'll be so caught off guard he won't even notice." "Your call," he shrugged, ringing the doorbell. After a few moments, we heard footsteps, and the door opened to reveal a tall, burly man with a thin scar running horizontally across his left cheek. He held a dirty rag in one hand, but put it on his shoulder as he opened the door. "Hello, Mr. Reese. I'm Agent Cochran, and this is my partner, Agent—" Ace began, but Tanner interrupted him. "Let me guess. You're here from the Division of Monster Hunting Secret Agents, and you're here to talk to me about what I saw in the forest," he asked, letting out a laugh. "Joke's over. Go home. Your parents are probably looking for you." I exchanged a glance with Ace. Sir, this is no joke. But before I could finish, Tanner shut the door in our faces. "That's not good," I hissed as we heard him walking back into his house. "This is more widespread than I thought if people are making fun of him for it." "Gas leak," Ace muttered, ringing the doorbell once more and readying his FBI badge. I nodded. It was a common cover-up, the idea that a gas leak had caused hallucinations, but it was effective and believable. "Go away," Tanner called from deep within the house. "Sir, we can provide identification," I replied as Ace glanced around, making sure we weren't attracting any unwanted attention. "I can assure you, we're entirely legitimate." After a moment, he reluctantly returned, snatching Ace's badge out of his hand. He scrutinized it for a few moments, then flipped it open to examine his ID card. After comparing it numerous times to Ace's face, he returned the badge and turned around, saying over his shoulder, "All right, come in, but make it quick. I have better things to do than talk to you two." "We're never going to get him to take the pill," I hissed, and Ace nodded as we walked in. The interior of the house was similar to its exterior, very plain. There were only 4 rooms, a living room to our right when we entered, a kitchen as the main area in the center of the house, a TV room to the right of the kitchen, and a closed door in the back of the kitchen that I assumed led to Tanner's bedroom. "All right, what do you want?" he grumbled, gesturing to the chairs on our side of the kitchen table while taking one at the head for himself. "We just have a few questions," I replied. "I'm not crazy," he snapped before I could begin asking him about the experience. "I know what I saw, and if you're here to take me away to some crazy people home, I'm not going." "That's not why we're here at all," I told him gingerly. "We believe you, and we believe that you're completely sane." "That's exactly what you'd tell a crazy person, isn't it?" he asked suspiciously. "I wouldn't know. I don't work with crazy people," I told him. He sat back in his seat, seemingly accepting the fact that we weren't here to take him away, but still unwilling to give us his full cooperation. "What's with the glasses?" he asked after a moment, and Ace raised an eyebrow at me. "Really? That's your question? Fine, I'll take them off," I sighed, tucking them back into my pocket. "You're telling me 2 agents from the supernatural branch of the FBI come to your doorstep and your first— You know what? Never mind." "Calm down, Clay," Ace said, holding up a hand. "No one's coming after you. Mr. Reese, why don't you get us all something to drink?" "I have beer," he replied, walking over to a cooler in the corner. "Smooth," I mouthed to Ace behind his back, and he grinned. Tanner returned to the table carrying 3 beers, and he set them down on the table, sliding one to each of us. "So, tell us your story," Ace said, sipping from his bottle. "You know my story," Tanner replied, leaning back in his chair and taking a drink. "That's why you're here." "Humor me," Ace shrugged. Tanner paused for a moment, biting his cheek, and relented. "All right. I was out in the forest a few weeks back, just taking a walk. I don't do it a lot, take walks, that is, but it was a nice day out, and my friend had told me he spotted a 12-point buck out there. Then he hastily added, I wasn't hunting it or anything. I know it's out of season. I just wanted to see if it was really there. Anyway, I'm walking down the main trail, and I see this guy way out in the woods. He's facing away from me, so I can't see what he's doing, but he was bent over, so I think he might be hurt. I go over to him and ask him if he needs help, but when I start getting close, he turns around, and I see that face. His eyes were gone. They just had sockets, and he was real pale. No mouth either. I start backing up when I see his face, and he starts talking to me. He asks what I'm doing out here, and I ask him who or what he is. What did his voice sound like? Ace asked. As Tanner was about to reply, I reached for my beer, but I purposefully misjudged the distance, knocking it over onto the table. Damn! I exclaimed, leaping up. As Tanner sighed and went to clean it up, I lifted his bottle off the wet area, cracked open a capsule of hypochloricin with one hand, and then emptied its contents into the bottle. Mr. Reese, I'm so sorry about that. I'm terribly embarrassed. Don't worry about it, he grumbled, and while he began to sop up the mess, I put his beer back on the table and sat down. I didn't spill much of my drink, so he finished quickly, but when he sat back down, my fears were confirmed. For the rest of our time there, he was much more reserved and unwilling to share than he had been in the beginning. We learned that the creatures weren't always hostile. In fact, the one Tanner met treated him quite well. It wasn't willing to talk about its origins or nature that much. In fact, they mostly just made small talk. We were just wrapping up, and the hypochloricin was about to take effect when suddenly, Tanner seemed to remember something. Oh wait, there was something else, he said, though the sedative in the capsule was beginning to slow his faculties. Something about a doctor. Which doctor? I asked excitedly, glancing at Ace. Dr. Vandersleen? He mumbled, his head swaying slightly, and after another moment his head tilted back and he was asleep. After a moment, Ace stood up from his seat, straightening his suit jacket. Well, he sighed. That certainly complicates things. After cleaning up our bottles, taking them with us so Tanner would have no proof we were ever there, Ace and I returned to the hotel. We knew it would be an early morning, so as soon as we arrived at our rooms, we went to sleep. We set off at the ungodly hour of 4 a.m., and while I was terribly groggy and tired, Ace seemed to share none of my reservations regarding the time. It's a wonderful day, isn't it? He asked as we checked our equipment in the trunk of the car. I think this is going to go just fine. I looked at him groggily. It's too early to deal with you. Don't be ridiculous, Carmen. It's never too early to fight the good fight, he replied with an annoyingly bright smile. Pass me the EMF sensor, will ya? I stared at him for a moment, then turned around without reply, making my way back inside the hotel for some coffee. Simple no would have been nice, he called after me, and I continued to ignore him. When I got back inside, as I was pouring out a mug of coffee from the pot that the front desk attendant had extremely reluctantly poured out for me, I spotted a woman sitting in the corner, staring at me. We were the only 2 people in the lobby, so it got awkward pretty quickly. What's up? I asked, looking over at her, after nearly a minute had passed where she hadn't stopped staring. A woman was reported missing today, she replied, rising and approaching me. Her name was Melanie Leon. She didn't have many friends. In fact, it was only noticed that she was missing because her car was in the same spot for nearly a week. Start a petition, I grumbled, setting the pot down and blowing on my coffee to cool it. I have important things to do. Stop wasting my time. Her car was parked at the Naugatuck State Forest, she continued, ignoring my statement. However, that did catch my attention. Where? I asked, turning to face her. The Naugatuck State Forest, she repeated. That's strange, isn't it? What do you mean by that? I don't suppose I mean anything by it, she told me, taking on an air of innocence. It's just quite unfortunate that someone has disappeared so close to where you'll be working, isn't it? I stared at her for a moment, trying to determine her motivation and her intentions. Who are you? I asked suspiciously. However, that seemed to turn her on to the fact that I was suspicious of her, and she said, I'd best be going. It was nice speaking with you, Agent Clay. She walked out of the hotel, and I was left there, standing alone in the lobby, holding a mug of coffee. In retrospect, I probably should have gone after her, maybe even made an arrest, but it was so early in the morning, and I was so caught off guard that it took me nearly half a minute just to recover. When I returned to the car, Ace glanced over to me. Oh great, Sleeping Beauty returns. Enjoy your coffee? I ignored his question. There was some strange lady in there, I told him. Really? He asked, closing the trunk, and we walked up to the front of the car, each getting in our seats. What do you mean? She told me that someone named Melanie Leon disappeared in the Naugatuck Forest, I replied. He looked at me, confused. Okay, that seems like fairly normal small talk, right? No, it was weird, I said, shaking my head. It was like she knew we were doing something in the forest. She emphasized that part pretty heavily. Are you sure you're not just imagining things because, you didn't get enough sleep? Ace asked. No, I know that's not it. Didn't you see her come out? I returned. You were the only person to walk out of that door this morning, he told me, pulling out of the hotel parking lot. He saw the concerned look on my face and said, I wouldn't worry too much about it. I tried not to, but the oddness of the whole encounter was a needling annoyance in the back of my brain for the rest of the drive over. When we arrived at the forest, the woman's news turned out to be true. Not only was the car still parked there, but police cars were swarmed around it, and officers milled about, taking samples of evidence, writing down notes, and at the center of it all was a man dishing out orders. He noticed us as we came in, and he began making his way over to us. Do we play the FBI card? I quickly asked Ace before the officer reached us. I think we have to, he replied. There's no way we're getting in the forest without pulling rank. The man reached our car and knocked on Ace's window, and he rolled it down. You can't be here. Forest shut down until we finish our investigation. We're also performing an investigation, Ace replied coolly, flipping open his badge. We won't be in your way, and we're also not here to pull jurisdiction. We just need access to the forest. He furrowed his brow, staring intently at the badge, and then examined the identification beneath the badge. He seemed suspicious of the slightly altered FBI logo, but the government lingo informing him we had rank on him seemed to do the trick. All right, go on then, he sighed, waving us on. Try not to disturb any evidence, and if you find anything that could help us, would you let us know? Sure thing, Captain, Ace said. Zong. Thomas Zong, he filled in. Good meeting you, Agent Cochran. You as well, Ace nodded and parked the car. He backed into the spot so we would be able to prep our gear away from the prying eyes of the officers. Looks like your mystery woman was right, Ace whispered as we opened the trunk. What are the odds her disappearance doesn't have anything to do with our creatures? I nodded. Let's just hope we can keep these cops away from them. If we can get Leon, get her out of here, and knock out the memories, we'll be golden. Easier said than done, he noted. But yes, that's the idea. Now, we didn't know anything about these creatures. We didn't know what would kill them, or if they even could be killed, but we had to bring some sort of protection, and the equipment we had was sort of just throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. There were 2 plain silenced guns, although the ammo they carried was what made them special. They contained various substances which were generally damaging to supernatural beings, such as capsules of holy water, silver, or sterilizing agents. Those would most likely prove to be the most useful, but we had a few other gadgets just in case. After packing up what we thought we'd need, we set off into the forest, locking our car and nodding goodbye to the captain. The forest was dark, as the sun hadn't fully risen, and the deeper we got, the denser the trees were, just like before. As we walked, we set down sensors every 10 minutes or so, sensors that were connected to a pager I had. If one were set off, it would send me a message informing me of which sensor had been activated. Just like the day before, the sounds of nature continued to be present despite the strange creatures inhabiting the forest, though that morning the creatures themselves were nowhere to be found for quite some time. In fact, there was absolutely nothing to be found for about an hour and a half, at which point the sun had begun to rise, casting an eerie glow over the forest, and long shadows stretched across the ground, making shapes nearly indiscernible. The illusion made it so hard to determine what was what, we almost missed the biggest lead we'd gotten to that point. As we walked, mostly in silence, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a sudden lurching movement. I stopped walking and glanced over to where it was, but I couldn't see it. Then, there it was again. It was something walking in pained, jilted steps toward us, and it seemed to blend into the background when it wasn't moving. As it got closer, I could hear that it was emitting a low, groaning noise as it walked, and I called to Ace. "Hey, look at this." "What?" he asked, turning around. I pointed to the thing, still unable to determine what it was, and he peered closely at it. Lowering his voice, he said, "What is it? It doesn't look like one of the creatures." "I don't think it is. Could it be another creature?" He didn't reply, only unclipping the buckle that secured his gun in its holster. He slowly began to walk forward, trying to get a better look at whatever it was, and then it slipped out of a shadow. It was a person. A heavily mutilated person, and one who was clearly on the brink of death, but a person nonetheless. What was presumably their blood covered their face, their clothes, and every inch of exposed skin, which was more than what would usually be so, as their clothes were torn practically to shreds. I rushed forward, seeking to aid whoever it was, but I could see Ace remain standing still, appalled at the sight. I gingerly took a hold of the person's arm and asked, "Excuse me, can you speak?" A dry, rasping sound emitted from what I could hesitantly guess was a female by now, and it became apparent that she hadn't drank water in far too long. "Ace, give me your water bottle," I demanded as the woman fell into my arms. He didn't reply, transfixed on the horrific affair that was the woman's state of being. "Ace, come on, she needs help." Right, he said, quickly shaking his head to clear it. He reached into his pack and produced the plastic water bottle he'd brought with him and tossed it to me, and I slowly tilted the woman's head back and gently poured a small amount of water into her mouth. She swallowed it eagerly, her head jerking forward for more. "No, slowly," I gently told her, unsure if she even had conscious thought at the moment. I gave her more water, with each sip increasing the amount, and after a few minutes she had regained consciousness to an extent where she could speak. Where am I?" she croaked, her voice still sounding raspy and thin. "You're in the Naugatuck State Forest," I replied softly. "You're injured badly. What do you remember?" "Who are you?" she coughed, coming to her senses. "My name is Carmen Clay. I'm with the FBI. We're here to investigate something in this forest, and there's a chance it contributed to your injuries. Can you tell us anything about what happened to you?" You're from the FBI?" she asked weakly, and I nodded. "What's your name?" I said, deciding to pursue another avenue of questioning. "Elizabeth Barry," she told me, and I recognized the name as one of the 2 disappearances that had been linked to the creatures. "All right, Elizabeth, I'm here to help you," I assured her. "Where did you come from?" "Deeper in the woods in the direction I came," she replied, more strength coming back to her by the minute. "It was a sort of building, but there were no windows. I couldn't see anything, so I don't know where it was. I went to sleep one night, and I woke up in the middle of the forest." I looked over to Ace to see what he thought of it, but he didn't meet my gaze. He was looking intently at Elizabeth. I looked back at Elizabeth and asked, "Okay, I assume you were being kept against your will. Who else was in the building? Did you get a good look at your captors?" Yes, oh God, yes, Elizabeth shuddered. You might think I'm crazy, but I'm sure they weren't human. They didn't have faces, It's all right. We don't think you're crazy. We're here about those creatures. I nodded. We're going to take care of them and take care of you. Don't worry at all. My partner Ace is going to get you out of here. You're going to be fine. Can you... Before I could finish, her eyes widened and she let out a yell. Wait! There was something else. Someone else. What do you mean, another prisoner? I asked, remembering Charlie Donaghy as the other disappearance related to the creatures. Where is he? Did they set him loose too? No, he's not all right. He's... She said, beginning to stutter. He's dead. How do you know? What did they do to him? I asked, instantly alert. Is there any chance he's still alive? Are you just making an assumption? No, I know he is dead, she told me, tears beginning to stream down her face. Because I was the one that killed him. What? I exclaimed, my eyes widening. What do you mean you killed him? I'm sorry, it wasn't my fault, she sobbed, the tears cutting swaths through the blood that was beginning to dry on her cheeks. They told me they'd let me go if I shot someone whose head was in a bag, and I was scared, and they hurt me, and... Shh, I said, soothing her. It's all right, everything is going to be okay. It took a few minutes to calm her down after her revelation, but at that point I was able to pass her off to Ace, who still seemed a little distant. Feed her some hypochlorocin and take her back to the police, I told him. Whatever was going through his head, the case was too urgent to deal with it, so I had to trust that he wasn't going crazy. I'll go up ahead and see what I can find. Follow me once you're done. He merely nodded and began helping Elizabeth off toward where we'd come from. I set off in the opposite direction, and within minutes, I was completely alone. As it had the day before, a mist was setting in across the forest in the early morning sun. However, I noticed that the further into the forest I went, the thicker it got, and it got thick. I stumbled my way through the forest, effectively blind, in search of wherever Elizabeth had been kept. I was acting rash, but I didn't realize it until I was too far away from the path to backtrack. Instead, I just stopped where I was, trying to do anything I could to check my bearings. The sun was just beginning to come up, but through the mist it was nearly indiscernible. Damn it, I cursed under my breath, spinning around to see if there were any landmarks I could see, until... Crack. I froze. Something had just moved. My heart began to pound in my chest, distracting me from whatever other noises could be out there. Slowly, I unbuckled my gun's strap and slid the weapon out of its holster. Who's there? I meekly called out into the fog, realizing that it could be a civilian, but not wanting to lower my guard. Reveal yourself, or I will shoot. Wait, no, came the reply. I'm human, don't shoot. What? I exclaimed, cautious but more relaxed. Who are you? My name is Melanie Leon, and this place is dangerous. You have to get out of here, she replied as I began making my way toward her voice. I mean, you've got a gun, so you probably know that, but still, it's worse than you think. What do you mean? I asked, confused. There are monsters here, she explained, entering my line of sight. You probably know that, but they're here for a reason. There's this building they're all concentrated in, and it's underground. They capture people hiking around here and take them down there. I don't know what they do, but it can't be all that pleasant. Listen, you're the one that's not supposed to be here, I replied. I'm with the FBI. How do you know all this? I'm a paranormal investigator. Trust me, you're in over your head. Have you reported this? She asked. I was the one that received the report, I told her. Now get out of here before you become a liability. Excuse me? She said, offended. I've been working this case for weeks. You got here yesterday. I think I've got it covered. I'm an FBI agent, I reminded her, taken aback. I have jurisdiction everywhere. That's not even close to how that works, Melanie called my bluff, shaking her head. Listen, I've been doing this for 5 years. I'm no liability. You can either keep telling me to go back and go at it alone, or we can work together and get to the bottom of this. Your choice. I nodded, impressed by her tenacity. Alright, let's do this, I guess. What do you know about this building? Follow me, she replied, nodding toward the direction I hadn't explored yet. As we began walking, she explained her information to me. I've narrowed the location down to a few acres, and with your help, that should be easy to canvass. I'm fairly certain it's underground, although it definitely could be camouflaged or something of that nature. I nodded, impressed by her professionalism. Do you know anything about why they're here, or what they're doing with the people they kidnap? Well, not exactly, she responded. I was actually inside their compound. They got me from behind while I was out investigating. I only just got out today, but I'm not really sure why. I heard screams while I was in there, so it's probably not terribly pleasant, but the likelihood of that wasn't very high anyway. You were inside the building? I asked. That seems like very important information to bring up. What happened? It wasn't that much. I think they knew I was investigating them, so they didn't reveal anything important, she told me. I was attacked from behind and knocked unconscious, and when I woke up, I was in this dingy cell with no windows and a door made of some kind of heavy metal. By my guess, I was in there for a few days, but there was no way to tell time. Then, last night, I fell asleep and woke up in the middle of the forest. You're right. They must have wanted to keep you away from something, I agreed. You've been reported as missing. That must be why they let you go. Wonderful. I've only been gone for 5 days? She remarked, rolling her eyes. As we walked, a sudden beeping noise emitted from something on her, startling me. What's that? I asked, glancing around to make sure nothing else had heard it. A rudimentary tracker I set up. We're in the hot zone, she told me, pulling the device out of her back pocket. Keep your eyes open. They could be anywhere. You're going at it without a weapon? I asked, noticing her lack thereof. Not by choice. They took my gun, she angrily replied. The truck's too far away to go get my backup, and besides, these things are usually easy to handle. Unless they sneak up behind you? I asked, glancing over my shoulder. Yeah, pretty much, she nodded. We walked through the mist in silence for a bit, and then she spoke up once more. Why are you here, out of curiosity? There were a few disappearances, and a guy said he talked with one of them. We're here on a cover-up mission, I told her, then paused, surprised at my willingness to reveal the information. If I save your ass, do I get to keep my memories? She asked. We'll talk about it, I replied. It looked like she wanted to pursue the matter, but before she could, there was a noise from somewhere off in the forest that halted our conversation. Creak. I held my finger to my lips, but Melanie was a step ahead of me. She knelt down, surveyed the small area of visibility we had, and crept toward the noise. After a few seconds, another sound caused her to freeze, the sound of footsteps. They were off to the right, close to where the creek had come from, but it was closer to us by 10 or so feet. Melanie was just on the edge of my limited field of vision, and she gestured to where the footsteps were coming from. Confused, I hissed, What? Take care of whatever that is, then meet me inside, she replied in a harsh whisper, and without another word, continued on into the fog. Take care of it? I exclaimed quietly, but she was either already out of earshot, or she ignored me. Left with no other choice, I lowered myself into a crouch and began searching dutifully for whatever was out here. Visibility was negligible. If I was going to get this thing, I was going to have to rely on my other senses, along with my reflexes and training. Assessing the situation, I decided that in the worst-case scenario, I was dealing with one of the creatures. There was a chance it was a human, but treating it like one of the creatures would be the smart and safe move. The first crunch it had produced was alone, but I knew it wasn't standing still. They were intelligent. They recognized the danger of firearms, so it wouldn't risk staying in one spot for too long, knowing I had one. I strained my ears, no longer searching for the sharp crunch of heavy footsteps, but instead for the light padding of careful feet, and sure enough, I could hear the creature making its way from my left to my right. I couldn't get a bead on its exact location, so I felt around for a rock on the forest floor, and when I found one, I tossed it up in the air, aiming for a spot behind where the creature stood. Then, 3 things happened. First, the fist-sized rock slammed into the ground about 15 feet ahead of me, creating an excellent imitation of a footstep. Then, a fraction of a second later, there was another crunch as the creature reacted to the false footstep. And finally, I adjusted my aim based on the sound and fired 3 shots in quick succession, spreading them out to give me a margin of error. I listened for a moment, but the only sound was that of the echoes of my gunshots. After scooping up the 3 shells, I briefly checked the area for the creature's body, but it was nowhere to be found. I didn't have time to look further, though, so I just pushed on towards where Melanie had headed just before. The base was easy to find. It was a fairly large metal bulkhead embedded a few inches into the soil, a camouflage tarp lying discarded on the ground to the right, most likely cast aside by Melanie. The door was slightly ajar, so I pulled it the rest of the way upwards, and it revealed a set of stairs descending into the earth, their destination obscured. Not wanting to waste time, I briefly glanced around, then plunged down into the murky base. Luckily, the darkness didn't last. After the first 40 feet or so, the soil turned to cement and fluorescent lights began, lighting up the hallway at intervals of around 10 feet. I knew I didn't have much time to dawdle, but I couldn't help but be amazed at the professionalism of it all. It clearly had been built a long time ago, and this operation evidently ran deeper than we'd expected. It was a straight shot. There were no branches or offshoots to get distracted by, so I quickly reached the end of the tunnel, a thick metal door, also left slightly ajar. I slowed to a walk as I approached it, wary of the danger that could lie on the other side, and peered through the gap. The room it led to was small and dimly lit, containing a control panel that took up the lower half of the wall directly across from me, a window taking up the upper half of it, and 3 doors. One was on that back wall, leading into the room on the other side of the glass, while the other 2 were on either side of the room, and I couldn't see inside them. The room was empty, and from my angle, I couldn't see into the window, so I nudged the door open enough that I could fit, and slipped through. As soon as I stepped into the room, 2 of the white-faced creatures jumped me. They'd been standing behind the door, waiting for me, and I had walked right into their trap. They acted swiftly, the first grabbing my left wrist and prying it backwards, inciting me to let out a yelp of pain and drop my gun. The second simultaneously coming around my other side, grabbing my right arm with an iron grip and twisting it behind my back. "Get off of me!" I shouted, struggling against their hold. It was in vain. They were supernaturally strong, a fact I quickly realized. Deciding to save my energy for a better use, I went limp. Once they realized I wasn't going to put up a fight, at least at this point, the creatures dragged me off toward the door on the left. I was unable to get a good look inside the window, they passed too quickly, but I was quickly distracted by what lay in the second room. It was a round room with a wall of monitors on the left, displaying what seemed to be various security cameras from either around the forest or inside the facility. There was a man sitting in the chair in front of the monitors, facing away from me, and several of the blank-faced creatures stood behind him, circled around 2 humans tied up on the floor. I couldn't see who they were, and before I could get a better look, the man spoke. "Your partner has been trained very well, Agent Clay," he said, speaking in a thick German accent that nearly made his words impossible to make out. "He refuses to speak, even under much pain." I cursed internally. If Ace had already been captured, there was little to no chance of me making it out alive. Still, my instincts took over, and I began stalling for time. "Who are you?" I asked. "What are these things?" "I am Dr. Magnus van der Sleen, and these things are ancient creatures devoted to serving the greatest master, and that is I," he replied, spinning his chair around. His appearance wasn't quite what I expected. Instead of a frizzy-haired, goggle-toting mad scientist, van der Sleen was a young, able-bodied, almost handsome man. He wore the traditional lab coat, which happened to be splattered with blood, and his jet-black hair was slicked back to prevent it from falling into his eyes. He stood approaching me. "Tell me, Agent Clay, what is the most pain you've ever experienced?" Was it a broken bone, perhaps? Did you grab a hot pot handle after your mother told you not to? Go on, tell me. What is this, some kind of sex thing? I replied. Then I spat in his face. He didn't flinch, merely raising a finger to flick the saliva off his cheek. I can wait, Agent Clay, he told me, tapping his foot. But I don't need to. I'm sure you're familiar with the strength the comite possess. You would not want that strength directed toward you. Now I'll ask again. What is the most pain you have ever experienced? I bit my lip. This clearly wouldn't go anywhere unless I answered him, and he was right. The comite, as he called them, were incredibly strong. I got shot, I told him. Excellent, he said, a smile spreading across his thin lips. Where? My hip, I told him. I bled out for a few hours, but I survived. Why do you care? I'm glad you asked, Agent Clay, he said, nodding, and turned around. He began to pace. Pain is my profession. More than that, it is my passion. This is what I use this facility for. I experiment with pain. I test the limits of the human body. I bring my subjects to the edge of death, and when they are there, and they beg for its sweet release, I snatch them back. Over and over again I do that, until their feeble physical bodies expire. I squinted at him, confused. I'm an FBI agent, I told him. You can't keep me here. The Bureau will find me. They may come, yes, he nodded. And if they do, we will be waiting for them. You think you and your little group of creatures can withstand the brunt of the FBI? I scoffed, shaking my head. Yeah, all right. No, Agent Clay, he said, letting out a slight laugh as he approached me once more. When his face was mere inches from mine, he whispered, But I have many friends, and these friends, they will see your agency as nothing more than an ant crushed beneath their heels. His words sent a shiver down my spine. I knew that they were just words, in all likelihood an empty threat, but something about the way he said them, the confidence with which he spoke, it scared me. Your partner doesn't ask as many questions as you do, he said, changing the subject and turning back to the two people laying in the midst of the comite. Do you, Agent Cochran? Please, for the last time, that's not my name, the man groaned. It wasn't Ace. I could tell that already, and my brow furrowed. I quickly cleared my expression, though, observing the conversation. Just let me go. I'm a police officer. Vandersteen chuckled. I admire you. Not many have held a false story under the amount of pain you've endured. It's not a false story, he insisted, rolling over. I could see him properly now, and it was horrifying. He'd been beaten to a pulp, clearly. His face ran red with blood, and his hair was matted down, strewn across his head. He looked very similar to how Elizabeth had looked when we'd found her, and they'd obviously gone through the same treatment. But, even through all the wounds, my memory didn't fail me. It wasn't Ace at all. It was Thomas Zong, captain of the Naugatuck Police Department. Vandersteen thought Captain Zong was Ace. That meant that Ace was still out there, which meant that my chances of getting out just skyrocketed. At that point, stalling became imperative. However, it seemed like Zong was about to do his best to jeopardize our situation. He spotted me, and he seemed to recognize me. You! Tell him I'm not your partner. You were there this morning. The doctor looked at me curiously. What do you mean, Ace? You can drop the act. We've been caught. Don't make this harder on yourself. No, I'm not Ace. I'm not an FBI agent. I'm just a police officer, he replied earnestly, trying to clamber his way to his feet. You have to tell him. You don't know me. He's going to take me back there, please. You're going back to the chamber anyway, he told him condescendingly. But since it's her first time, why don't we let your partner experience it first? The chamber? I asked. What's that? I'm sure you saw it on the way in. Your other friend, Miss Leon, is currently occupying it, but I'd say she's had enough for her first go at it, wouldn't you? He said, smiling once more, but this time it was a dark, evil smile. Take her in and prepare her. What? Where am I going? I exclaimed as the two creatures suddenly began dragging me back the way we'd entered. Answer me. What's the chamber? You shall see, Agent Clay, he replied. You shall see. I resumed my struggle, trying to wrench my arms free from their grips, but it was useless. Stop it! Face me, Vandersleen! I shouted, frantically trying to avoid whatever lay within the chamber, and when the comite opened the door to it, my heart dropped. The moment they heaved open the heavy door, ear-splitting screams emerged from the room within. The creature to my right departed to the control panel, while the one on my left shifted so that he was directly behind me, and he brought me into the room. Seated in a chair in the center was Melanie Leon. She was strapped down at her wrists and ankles, and there were several strange contraptions around her. First, both her vision and, I assume, hearing were blocked by a semicircular dome around her head. There was also a robotic arm on either side of her, both stationary at the moment, but there was a table at the side that held several sharp objects on it. After a moment, her screams died down, and she sat in the chair, simply panting. "Melanie," I shouted, struggling against my captor. "Melanie, what's going on? What's happening?" "Are you the FBI agent?" she asked through labored breaths. "Get me out of here. He got me." "He got me too," I replied as two new comite entered the room, beginning to remove her from the chair. Don't let them put you in the chair," Melanie panted. "Whatever you do, don't let them." I gulped. "Come on, Ace," I thought to myself as the comite forcefully pressed me down into the seat and began strapping me in. Any minute now. But he didn't come. Instead, the doctor's servants strapped me into the chair Melanie had just warned me to under no circumstances sit in. However, they didn't lower the sensory depriver yet. A speaker in the top right corner of the room crackled to life. "Agent Clay, you are about to experience the Magnus machine. I considered Vandersleen machine, but the rhyme made it seem far too comical. When you're finished, we'll have to discuss the merits of an alliteration versus a rhyme." "What do you want from me?" I exclaimed, glancing up at the creatures fixing me in. "I don't get it. What's your end goal here?" "There's a simple answer to that, Agent Clay," he replied. "All I want is pain." Then the creatures slid the black dome over my head, and Vandersleen got what he wanted. The blackness of the helmet devoured me. For a split second, there was nothing. Then, there was pain. And that was all there was. Pain. My world exploded into a blinding, searing pain, encapsulating my entire body. No, my entire being. For what felt like an eternity, pain was all there was. I couldn't think. I didn't remember anything. It was like pain was all there ever was, all there ever would be. I don't remember deciding to scream. I just remember screaming. The pain consumed me. It was sharp yet dull, searing yet freezing. It was everything at once. When Vandersleen said that pain was his profession, he wasn't lying. The most pertinent thing about the experience was that there was no hope. I couldn't even fathom the idea that this pain would end. I'd already been convinced that this would last until my death, so when it actually stopped, I had no idea what was going on. I actually thought that it was a new method of torture at first. The change in intensity was so stark. However, after a few moments, I realized it had indeed stopped. I waited a bit in complete silence and darkness, and then, mercifully, the dome was lifted, and I instantly realized a lot had happened while I'd been in the machine. The room was now lit with a dim red light, what I correctly assumed to be emergency lighting, and the one-way mirror separating me from the control room had been smashed. There was no one at the panel, and when I looked up at the person who'd taken the dome off, I was surprised to see Melanie, post-torture wounds still fresh. "Melanie?" I croaked, coughing, Haven't forgotten that my vocal cords were frayed after all that screaming. What happened? I cut the power, she said, working on the straps. This place is self-contained, so it's like a string of Christmas lights. Shut one down, the whole thing blows. Did you get Vandersleen? I asked, rubbing my wrists. No, he wasn't here. Must have slipped away when the power went out, she told me, helping me to my feet. All the creatures are gone, too. She supported most of my weight as we climbed through the shattered window. She put down her coat on the ledge so we could climb over without tearing up our hands, and when we reached the other side of the room, I saw that the doctor had clearly left in a hurry. Things were strewn about, the chair was pushed to the side of the room, and there was a mug of some drink sitting unattended on the panel, still warm. How did you get away from the creatures? I asked, brushing glass off my pants. Well, it was largely thanks to the other 2 prisoners. The guy explained the story to me. That's an incredibly lucky mistake on Vandersleen's part, isn't it? She said. Anyway, we had begun to figure out the creatures in the first 20 minutes or so. You know, what made them tick, their rules, whether or not they'd go running back to the doctor. Once we had a pretty good understanding of what their capabilities were, the plan came together. Zong, that's the policeman, still had his baton and handcuffs. The creatures didn't recognize either as weapons, only taking his gun. So before Vandersleen saw him for the first time, he hid anything that could be useful in his cell. We figured the creatures were a bit like robots. They could talk and make decisions, but it was just, programming. They couldn't think. So, since the door was like a prison cell, we handcuffed one of the creatures assigned to guard us to a bar and hit the other one over the head with the baton. Right away, the one we'd handcuffed started walking off to report it, since the second one wasn't really affected by it. Yanked the lock right off the door, and I sprinted right out, while Zong and the girl went to work on the thing. I found the nearest fuse box, went to town on it, and here we are. I nodded, admiring the bold gamble. Before I could praise her bravado, however, a voice from the door to our left interrupted me. You have made a grave mistake, Miss Leon, Vandersleen said, shaking his head as he slowly walked into the room. She let go of me and I fell to the floor, catching myself to avoid injury. She whipped out her gun, lining it up at his head, and click. Miss Leon, did you really think I would leave you a loaded weapon? He laughed chidingly. There was a bullet in there. I shot the glass, she replied, ejecting the cartridge and seeing that it was indeed empty. I knew you would, he told her, directing a comite to disarm Melanie. I didn't want you picking up more bullets, so I had to allow you to think the gun was loaded. As the creature drew nearer to Melanie, however, she decided retaliation was the best idea. She relaxed her body, flipping her gun around to give it to the creature. But when it was within striking distance, she suddenly jerked it up, slamming the butt into its chin. The creature's head snapped back, and though it recovered quickly, it wasn't quick enough. Melanie planted a kick on its stomach, knocking it backwards, and then spun around about her foot, hitting it with a roundhouse kick to the head. When she landed, Vandersleen smiled. Impressive, Miss Leon, but I should caution you against further resistance. I have recaptured your partner and that innocent civilian as they made their feeble attempt at escape, and if I do not make it out of this room, they will never be seen again, I assure you of that. Melanie glanced at me, and I thought it over. It was trading lives no matter what, but Melanie and I definitely could take it better than they could, and we still had an ace in the hole. I shook my head, and she sighed. All right, you win. She carefully put the gun on the floor, then kicked it over to Vandersleen. Thank you, he said, picking it up. He took the cartridge out and threw it away, producing a loaded one from his pocket, and inserted it. He cocked it and said, I really do try and keep my subjects alive longer, but you've proven to me you're far too much trouble for that to be a viable option. Then he pointed the gun at Melanie. Wait, what? I exclaimed. You're just going to kill us? Well, yes, that's the plan, he replied. However, right as he was about to take the shot, the door behind me burst open. Before I could look to see who it was, they said, Plans change, asshole. The doctor's chest exploded as several gunshots rang out, spraying blood all over the comite closest to him, and he let out a small groan before letting the gun fall from his limp hand and then falling flat on his face. "No, no," I shouted, scrambling to my feet, ignoring the jolt of pain. "He's going to kill 2 civilians." But then I turned around, and it was Ace standing in the doorway, holding a smoking pistol with a grim look on his face. "Ace!" I exclaimed as he approached to help me up. I was so relieved to see him that in my unstable state, I forgot about Thomas and Elizabeth. "What took you so long? We almost died. And what happened? Why did Vandersleen think Thomas was you?" "It's complicated," he replied, helping me up. Elizabeth and I were getting close to the forest edge when suddenly she collapsed. We were near the parking lot, so I called for assistance, and Thomas came, which must be where the creatures got him. I was busy calling in backup. They should be here soon. And then an idea occurred to me. We hadn't spoken with the church yet, so I made the trip there. "You went to the church?" I exclaimed, shaking my head. "What did you do that for? I would have rather, gotten out of here, No, the information they gave me may have just saved your life," he replied. "I asked them about the creatures, and they told me they were comite, a demon from ancient times. They're servant creatures. They don't do much on their own, and they'll follow the orders of whoever summons them to a T. They're mortal, too, at least in a way. When they die, they're sent back to hell, where they're in a dormant state until their next summoning." "I don't see how this saved my life," I told him, the memories of Thomas and Elizabeth suddenly flooding back. "Wait, no, you weren't supposed to kill him, Ace. He still has—" "I was getting to that," he said, holding up a finger. "The pastor also told me that when a master is killed, any comite he summoned will cease following his orders. They won't die. They'll just walk the earth aimlessly, creatures without purpose." I glanced over at the pale-faced creatures who just minutes ago had been at our throats, and sure enough, they simply stood there, their hollow eyes seeming to reflect a measure of sadness or even depression. "I came as soon as I could," he assured me. "Now it's my turn. What the hell happened to you?" I saw him staring at my face, and I touched my finger to my cheek. It came away sticky, a mixture of sweat and blood from what I could tell in the red light. "The guy's a nut," I told him. Well, at least he was. "Hold that thought," a voice called from further down the hallway, and we looked over to see none other than Seth Nolan, the branch's archivist, sprinting down the hall, in front of a pack of other agents, specialists, and other co-workers. I'm here. Tell me everything." "Seth, I can't believe you came all the way out here," I said, smiling. "It's like 2 hours by car," he replied, raising an eyebrow. "It's not that far." "I don't think I've ever seen you leave the record room," Ace pointed out. "I think you might sleep there." "Oh, ha, very funny," Seth rolled his eyes. "I was going to record this and file the report for you, but no, go ahead, make fun of me." "We're joking, Seth," I said, smiling as he shook his head. "All right, go. Put it on." He clicked the tape recorder, and I explained everything, from Hebert's gut feeling to Ace shooting Vandersleen just then. Once I finished the whole story, I sighed. "That's just about everything. Open and shut case," I told him. But then something occurred to me. "Wait a minute. There's something else. I mean, I don't know if it's important. It could just be nothing, really." No, what is it?" he asked. "Well, it's something the doctor said," I began. "When I told him the FBI would come for me, he said something about how he has friends, how they'd see the FBI as nothing, they'd beat us easily." "He's just trying to scare you," Seth replied. "That's ridiculous." "Why would he just be trying to scare me?" I pointed out. "Besides, look at this place. It obviously took some serious wealth to build it, and the fact that no one knows about it, it might run deep." Seth thought about it for a moment, then nodded. "All right, I suppose you've got a point. I'll make a note about it." "Thanks. It just got me thinking," I said. "Well, I'm going to check out the facility," he told us, looking around. "We might be able to convert it if we get the, stench of blood out." He walked off, and Melanie entered the conversation almost immediately. "Thanks for saving our asses, I guess," she said, nodding to Ace. "I don't think we've been introduced." Who is this? Ace asked. A civilian? She's Melanie Leon, I told him. And Melanie, this is my partner, Ace Cochran. Melanie is a supernatural investigator. She was on the case well before it was even on our radar. She's still a civilian, Ace repeated. She'll have to have her memory wiped. What? Melanie exclaimed. No way. If it weren't for me, your partner here would be a senile idiot right now. I saved her from hours of torture, and I made your rescue a hell of a lot easier. She's right, I said, and Ace raised an eyebrow. She's good. I'll vouch for that. I'm not saying we should offer her a job on the spot, but maybe we let her keep her memories? Did I hear the word civilian? Damon Hebert walked in, looking curiously at us. He stepped over Vandersleen's body, glancing distastefully at it, and said, You know what? Why don't we have this discussion elsewhere? Come, we'll take this outside. Commander Hebert, I said as Ace helped me walk down the hallway that led back the way I'd entered. This is Melanie Leon, and yes, she's a civilian, but she was instrumental in my survival and figuring out what was going on here. What are you insinuating? He asked. Well, sir, I think that we should allow Melanie to keep her memories, I said. She's very smart, capable, and physically talented. She would make an excellent asset. To allow a civilian to remember the supernatural is highly unorthodox, Damon replied. Not that it's never been done, but it's incredibly rare. Sir, I won't tell anyone, I promise, Melanie assured him. People will just see me like they always have, as a crazy person who believes in ghosts and monsters. Even if I wanted to tell them, there's no way they'd believe me. She's got a point, Damon agreed, stroking his chin. He stopped at the base of the stairs and then sighed. All right. I suppose if we were to allow a trial of sorts, we could always erase her memory later. If you truly did save Agent Clay's life, you've more than earned it. Thank you so much, sir. I promise I won't let you down. She hurriedly thanked him, shaking his hand eagerly. I believe you, he nodded. Now, if you'll give me a few moments alone with Agents Clay and Cochran, I'm sure one of our agents will be happy to give you a ride wherever you need to go. Sure thing. I'll see you later, guys, she said, waving to us. If you ever need me, give me a call. Count on it, I replied, and Ace nodded his affirmation. After she was out of sight, Hebert gestured for us to walk up the stairs into the forest. You've completed yet another case to an exquisite standard, he told us. Thank you, sir, I replied. Training agents will take care of moving the comite to a secure location now that they've been neutralized. Your job here is done, he told us. But to a more important matter. You've both been agents for at least a year, and though it's long overdue, I believe it's time we take your training wheels off. Beginning whenever you choose to return from this case, not only will you receive Level 3 clearance, but you will have top priority when determining your cases, and you'll receive the same treatment as other top-level agents. Wow, Ace said, whistling. This is an incredible honor, sir. You deserve it, he nodded. And in addition, I'd like to thank you for taking this case. I know it seemed like a drab, low-level case, but I knew it was something more. We've learned to trust your instincts, Commander, I said, inciting a chuckle. Well, as if you don't have it already, you've got my admiration, along with my trust. You may have as much time off as you need, and I encourage you to take it. Especially you, Agent Clay, he said, gesturing to my wounds, and I nodded. I will, sir. I don't want to be injured in the field, I told him. Good. Well, that's all from me. Once again, you have done well. You're dismissed. You might be asked to recount the events if there's a discrepancy, but other than that, I look forward to seeing you back when you feel ready. Thank you, sir. The feeling is reciprocated, Ace assured him. With that, we closed the book on the thing in the Naugatuck forest.